Nancy is the capital of eastern France. Nancy is a university town and it has the feel of that.
Golly woman, Holy Ghost mama, I ain't never seen a thing like you before.
A city of 100,000 people and 500,000 in the greater area. While it's 300 kilometres from Paris, it's on a direct road and rail connection. It's in Lorraine. Alsace and Lorraine is a region that the Germans invaded in the First World War, but didn't get as far as Nancy. It's not really one of those half-timbered towns like Alsace, like that region's known for. It's part of the Great East Department, and as such, when politicians or government talk of the Great East, it's quite difficult to separate it from the raised eyebrow of pride of Napoleon's once foray much further east. Napoleon ventured further than Germany, on the way to Russia and Moscow. France's Great East Department invoking images of invasion greatly eastward into Russia and Moscow. As French kings had before him, he used Swiss mercenaries in this campaign, as he did in the Iberian Peninsula Wars as well. Some of the best troops for both Napoleon and the kings before him, but they had tended to be better paid than anyone else, and that does tend to make you more reliable. The King's Guard, the Republican Guard, also had the Maréchaussée. The Maréchaussée was like a police force that guarded the King's palaces in Paris, and a smattering around different regions of France, keeping the order of the nobility. For the nobility. With the French Revolution, Napoleon later, the Maréchaussée just changed their name really to gendarmerie. It seems, walking around Paris now, in preparation for the Olympics, that all 100,000 of the gendarmerie of France are in Paris. These are the ones that are sweltering away all dressed up in black, looking a bit like riot police a lot of the time, sitting in hot vans, stretching their legs, having a chat over snacks and lunch, and carrying submachine guns. This is the police, the paramilitary force. There is also the rural and municipal police, these days at any rate, who do all the talking to people. The gendarmerie aren't really the ones that you ask directions of, they're the ones who crack heads in the name of whoever's controlling the state, anyone government at the time. You may have on a romantic weekend to Paris before. I'd recommend Nancy in the east of France for just such an occasion. Many years ago now there was the Nancy affair, to a British ear. The Nancy affair sounds a little bit like a very effeminate man, homosexual that takes the passive role in use in the 1800s as Nancy boy. And so in English, the Nancy affair is usually described as the Nancy mutiny. I'd suppose that if the affair is with anyone other than your partner, it is a bit of a mutiny, isn't it? Your ship will be sailing into stormy waters. But the Nancy affair puts a bit of a taint on the revolution, popular image of a people's revolt. There's many events over a number of months and years that go up to make the French Revolution, including events in more nearby Grenoble, as well as just the Bastille in Paris. But I say a taint because those female kid glove manufacturer cottage industry ladies that took to the streets in Grenoble, and the fishwives that marched on Versailles, create one image, whereas the Nancy affair seems much more like a military coup. The Nancy affair, the Nancy mutiny, is a bit of a love fest between different battalions and individual nobles regarding who's going to be on what side. It is a very important precursor to the French Revolution, just a couple of years later. But even in amongst all this paramilitary and military jostling for dominance, a female folk hero does emerge. Now, obviously there were no photos of this influencer of the times, and the reports were illustrated without even the knowledge of what the gate to the city of Nancy in question looked like. So her name gets recorded differently. It seems she was part of a couple that looked after the gate of the city and took tolls from people passing through. But after her recorded as heroic actions, a petition was raised to get her a pension. A commoner type person really wouldn't get a pension. But if you've single-handedly taken your life in your hands and saved the institution of monarchy, well, perhaps you should be rewarded if people make enough hue and cry about it. The petition for a pension emphasised how she'd shown great courage in collecting and tending the wounded, but it was her putting her dampeners on things that was the real. Oh, and having lost all their possessions during the crisis, were living in poverty, after being a proper mother to her children and to the nation. Honour, virtue, saving the country. La femme Humbert has acquired the gratitude of the country. Madame Humbert name should be remembered in posterity, though even the name of the gate gets written wrong, or perhaps there were 3 different gates. Perhaps there were women throwing buckets of water on cannons all the way around the city. Oh, yeah, what did she do? I want to know. The army of Monsieur Bouille was approaching the gates of the town of Nancy. The wife of the concierge of Port Stanislas, the gate, Madame Humbert, noticed that the soldiers who guarded the gate were preparing to light the cannons. After trying in vain to dissuade them, she did not fear to take action, since she realised that her strength and entreaties were of no avail against such maniacs. She went, instead, and fetched a pail of water and threw it on the fire pans on the tops of the cannons. Her courage so astonished the soldiers, who contented themselves with giving her verbal abuses. They were unable to use their artillery pieces until the very moment after the attack on the gate had already begun. Madame Humbert is our heroine. Decilles, Port Stainville, Gate, Hamburg. Whatever the names, it was 1790, and it was in the morning of the 31st. 4 pieces of artillery were ranged under the standalone city gate, a 24-pounder amongst them, positioned in the little door next to the caretaker's lodging. At about 2 o'clock, a man in the gunner's uniform noticed the emplacement. He spoke to Humbert's wife and asked where her children were. In my basement, came the reply. Take them elsewhere. If the gun goes off, the gate in your house will be blown sky high. The frightened mother fetched her children and took them to a safer house. Humbert remained at the gate and refused to leave. Once assured of her children's safety, Mrs. Humbert came back to share with Mr. Humbert the danger of perishing under the rubble. Arriving at the gate, she saw the soldiers ready to fire, shouted and cried out, "These are our friends, not Turks. They do not intend any harm." On finding exhortations useless, Delort placed his head in front of one of the cannons, whilst Decilles seized hold of another. A soldier who saw his comrades hesitate, in the face of such heroism, took a taper, went into the caretaker's lodge and lit it. Humbert's wife, who was more agile than her husband, poured water on the pan and returned to throw even more water on her fire. In her house in her lodgings, Humbert seized the soldier's taper and threw it away. The angry man came up and pushed him. At that moment he was fired on, and his blood spurted over Humbert and his wife. Bouill's troops entered the city and battle was engaged. Several officers and soldiers of the Royal Legeois regiment were wounded. Humbert and his wife took them in. Their children's bedding became bandages and all their linen. Likewise, their house was a refuge for 7 persons to whom they gave every care. I put these facts before you. A tender mother working for the safety of her children. Nothing extraordinary, but she returns to face danger partly because of her conjugal devotion, but also saving the life of a large number of Frenchmen who would have been killed, and saved her country from the fury of the troops, maddened by desire for vengeance, bloodlust and pillage. They helped others while under musket fire from 2 sides. 3 soldiers from Nancy were killed. Ask yourself, what did you do for your country to deserve your state pension? This August day saw the crushing of a military mutiny, of significance in that it illustrated the degree to which the discipline and the reliability of the Royal Army had been undermined by 13 months of revolutionary turmoil. During the first half of 1790, a number of acts of disobedience and small-scale mutinies occurred in various units, and political associations were being created with links to the Jacobins and other parties outside of the army. But let's cut to it. Specific military grievances were widespread amongst the soldiers, relating mainly to harsh discipline and conditions of service. The Swiss mercenaries, who were mainly in Paris, that were paid more, were subjected to much greater discipline and hardships, a little bit like the French Foreign Legion. But it was elements of the King's Guard that were revolting or in mutiny, particularly because they resented a measure taken in 1781 to reserve officer commissions to members of the nobility. This restriction had alienated many non-commissioned officers who now had no chance of promotion beyond their existing rank. So, you work hard all your life killing people and being really organised and stuff, and then some noble gets the promotion. Fester on this for 10 years and you've got a cause for the success of the French Revolution. Nepotism. By 1790 we'd had the storming of the Bastille, the mutiny of the Gardes Français, and the forced relocation of the royal family to Versailles, to Paris the year before. The officers of the army were still predominantly royalist, and rank and file were becoming increasingly influenced by the revolutionary turmoil all around them. Nancy, as a town, is on a frontier, and you don't want to have your frontiers destabilised. There were 3 regiments in Nancy. The Regiment de Roi, the Regiment de Châteauvieux, that's them Swiss mercenaries, of which there were 12 regiments in the French infantry. Estre de Camp Cavalry was the 3rd regiment. The soldiers' committee of the Regiment de Roi, the King's men, demanded the right to audit the regimental accounts. They arrested the quartermaster, confined the colonel and their officers to barracks, and seized the unit's pay chest. The Swiss, the Châteauvieux, followed suit, a particularly disturbing development from the perspective of the royal court, since the Swiss regiments were assumed to be the most reliable element within the army. The officers of the Châteauvieux were able to temporarily restore order and punish members of the soldiers' committee, according to the Swiss military code. That much harsher one in this case, running the gauntlet, where you run down a line of people beating you up. These actions led to renewed disturbances, now involving all 3 regiments of the garrison. The Nancy affair was all about money at the start. Daylight robbery. Fearing the outbreak of robbery in Nancy would spread to other garrisons located along the frontier, the National Constituent Assembly ordered from Paris suppression of the mutiny. They voted to abolish political associations within the army because of the increasing indiscipline. General Bouille, do you remember him? Army commander from Metz, nearby. 4,500 regular soldiers and National Guardsmen marched on Nancy, a committed royalist. was later to be a leading force in Louis XVI's attempted flight to Varennes, the escape attempt that sealed his fate. Wheel issued an ultimatum to a delegation of mutinous soldiers demanding the release of their officers, and the handing over of 4 ringleaders was all he required. This all seemed acceptable, really, but before the plan could be implemented by the mutineers, there was this incident at Stainville Gate, where the advance ranks of Bouillé's forces were halted by an artillery piece manned by soldiers of the Régiment de Roi, under Desilis, a junior officer. Not wanting to take anything away from Madame Humbert, but a junior officer is supposed to have stepped in front of the 24-pound cannon loaded with canister and attempted to dissuade the mutineers from firing on the government troops. He was shot down rather messily, and in the confusion the cannon was fired, killing about 60 of the loyal troops drawn up in close formation a few paces away. A general engagement then broke out. That's fighting type engagement, not kissing type engagement. And after 3 hours of it, that fighting, de Bouillé's troops put down the mutiny with heavy casualties amongst soldiers and civilians. 500 deaths in total. While the French regiments involved were to escape serious repercussions, the Swiss mercenary mutineers faced severe punishment after court-martial by their own officers. It got a bit medieval. The prime ringleader of the Swiss was broken on the wheel. 22 were hanged, 41 were sentenced to 30 years as galley slaves. This is France, not Rome, but it wasn't a galley layout kitchen. Boats weren't rowed anymore, it was just hard labour for life. And 74 others were imprisoned. The National Constituent Assembly approved of de Bouillé's actions, but radicals protested its severity. But these draconian measures had their effect on popular opinion. The very harsh medieval methods were to create a widespread sympathy for the mutineers throughout France, who were subsequently released by the way of joining in large-scale celebration, and to further weaken the discipline and morale of the regular army. It's recorded that disturbances in the Royal Army continued until the final overthrow of the monarchy in August 1792. But it's not clear whether disturbances were all robberies of the pay chest of the forces. It could be considered that there's an element in the Nancy affair, the Nancy mutiny, of stealing from the rich and giving to the poor. Armies famously went unpaid, but it not being entirely clear whether it's the non-commissioned officers that are doing all the revolting, and if they're actually sharing out their loot to their men, as you would like to think, or whether it's the greed of commissioned officers, just stealing for the fairly rich already themselves, the nobility, which could also start a revolution. But the transition from the king to the revolutionary forces to Napoleon, the army remains broadly unchanged. If Napoleon's in charge, you can be pretty sure that non-commissioned officer's rule of 10 years prior gets repealed at least. Even in the British Army today, the reality is that to get a commission, you have to have gone to the right schools and come from the right family. Military, like your forefathers before you.